Good morning, and thank you all for joining us for this much anticipated report release and discussion on the status of women entrepreneurship in Massachusetts. I'm Amy Whedon, the Chief Operating Officer of the Massachusetts Competitive Partnership, an organization made up of CEOs from 16 of the largest businesses in Massachusetts. Our mission is to maximize the competitiveness of Massachusetts' economy through programmatic and policy efforts focused on workforce, innovation, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm thrilled to be here to amplify not only the conversation about women entrepreneurs, but how each and every one of us can come together to reinforce and build a stronger ecosystem for what the report has identified as the highest growing, highest performing, and most economically underutilized sub-segment of entrepreneurs. We'd like to thank Deloitte for their dedication to producing such a comprehensive report that has and will allow us to double down on what is working and explore areas for improvement for supporting women entrepreneurs. And to the City of Boston, and specifically the Mayor's Office of Women's Advancement for their partnership on this important work. And with that, I'm going to pass the virtual mic over to Alexandra Valdez, Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of Women's Advancement. Alexandra?
Thank you so much, Amy. Such a pleasure to be here this morning, and thanks to everyone who's joining us and it's here to find out all the amazing feedbacks from the report. Like she mentioned, my name is Alexandra Valdez. I'm the Executive Director of the Office of Women's Advancement, and I'm so thrilled to be here and share this space with all of you. This report aligns with the work that the Office of Women's Advancement does to the top end. Our office focuses around a lot about economic equity, and the report is going to show and shows them that the fastest growing demographic of entrepreneur space is women. So I'm looking forward to learning, I'm looking forward to listening, and most of all, I am looking forward to pushing through the work to make sure that we are supporting this space, and we are supporting this space and entrepreneur for women in the city of Boston. And I'll pass it back to Amy. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Alexandra. And next we have Corey Thomas, the Chairman and CEO of Rapid7 and our MACP Social Justice Committee co-chair. Corey joined MACP in 2020, has become a strong voice on our board and in the areas of both innovation and technology and economic opportunity. In addition to sitting on MACP's board, he is a member of the Cyber Threat Alliance Board of Directors and is a member of the Massachusetts Cybersecurity Strategy Council. Corey has many years of experience leading technology companies to the next stage of growth. Please welcome Corey Thomas to provide our welcoming remarks.
Thank you, Amy. As co-chair of the MACP Social Justice Committee with Ronald Hanley from Straight Street, I'm excited to be part of releasing this report and to join the fantastic speakers and guests today. More importantly, I'm looking forward to the opportunity to address the disparities that you'll hear more about in just a few moments. We're all aware of the many restraints and biases that affect women in business, but it's vital to have research that shows exactly where we fall short and to guide us to make a greater impact in the future. As we look at social justice and reflect on the recent violence against women and the Asian community in particular, it's clear that the need for specific actions towards equality are intersectional by nature. Gender, race, and economic disparities are all interrelated, and reports like this with a focus on action will help us transform the entrepreneur economy and our society. With that, I'm honored to introduce Lieutenant Governor Karen Polito. I had the chance to get to observe her and her leadership firsthand, as she was part of the team that led us through the COVID crisis and response. She's also built close relationships throughout Massachusetts over 2 terms as Lieutenant Governor. She's focused on investments in STEMs, which is a tech CEO I have particular interest in and I'm incredibly grateful for. And Lieutenant Governor Polito has focused on mobility, resilience, and has done tremendous work to combat domestic violence. Without further ado, Lieutenant Governor Karen Polito.
Thank you, Corey. It's great to be with all of you. I want to thank MACP, Jeff Leiden, Amy, Jay, the whole team there, the City of Boston. And yes, shortly after the COVID hit the Commonwealth, we had to think about obviously the response, but also how we were going to eventually reopen businesses. And Corey, you were right there with many meetings where We listen to business owners and operators all across our state. Thank you for your leadership and helping during that really critical time. I just want to say this is a really important effort. It's clearly, when you think about small business and the backbone of our economy, both here in the Commonwealth and the country, it's an opportunity for us to support the women entrepreneurs, minority entrepreneurs throughout our Commonwealth to be able to succeed. This is an opportunity to make sure that there's access and opportunity to achieve your dreams and make sure that your business can operate successfully in the Commonwealth. I love the report's title, It's Her Time. It is her time, but it's also on us. It's on us as women to support women. We need to be the voices for each other to move forward. I want to just start with this whole intentional effort to step up our game here in the Commonwealth to support women-owned enterprises. You know, my great-grandfather immigrated to this country in 1909. He had the ability to work hard. He worked with his hands. He built concrete blocks. He built a lot of concrete blocks and he saved his money. And eventually he was able to buy a piece of construction equipment and start a business that would make life better for his family. That's a business that's still in our family today. And it comes with a great source of pride and a responsibility to make sure that the business continues to be successful here in our Commonwealth. But it starts with that opportunity, that idea or dream that someone has, and be able to facilitate that into something successful. I also just know that the recommendations in this report won't just be on paper, that this is a document that will guide us with a roadmap to move forward together with. We are our best when we collaborate and work together, but we also need to be intentional. And if that's one word we hang on today, it's to leave this conversation with the absolute intent to take those next steps and to help women and minorities and others be able to achieve their dreams. Let me just take down a few things that our administration has been able to do since we've taken office. For instance, boards and commissions. We have been able to appoint 51% women on these boards, intentional to give women a chance to be able to add this status to their resume and to be able to use it as an experience to network. When you think about the courts, the ability to elevate Kim Budd to the chief of the Supreme Judicial Court and have the first Latina woman serve on the Supreme Judicial Court was really a great sense of honor for the governor and I to participate in. During this pandemic, to set up a fund to help small businesses, the Mass Growth Capital Corps, we were able to make sure that 6,900 women-owned businesses received the grant up to $75,000 to literally keep the lights on, to make their payroll and to keep their small business going. We all know the downtowns and main streets are populated with small businesses, restaurants, retail shops. You know the owners of these places, but they have been hardest hit in this pandemic, and we want to make sure that they continue to succeed. The state, as a business partner, we started the Supplier Diversity Office to make sure that the procurements that the state conducts make sure that minority and women-owned businesses have an opportunity and an easier access to be able to do business with the Commonwealth. I have had the honor to chair both the Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence Council and the STEM Council. It's all about breaking down barriers. And in a pandemic, when we said that it's safer to be at home, there were many women in our Commonwealth where it wasn't safer to be at home because of the violent home that they may be living in. And to be able to break out of the cycle of violence and give women the support they need to be safe here in our Commonwealth is a clear objective of our administration. And when it comes to STEM, there are so many more opportunities for women and girls to be able to pursue. We know that innovation, the tech economy, life science are key clusters in our Commonwealth. But we need to also make sure that girls and women are developing the skills that are valuable to these industries and that they have the pathways forward, whether it's through a STEM Starter Academy or through our innovation pathways in our schools, or making sure that they have access to the Career Technical Institute to be able to gain the skills that are employable in these higher paying and higher demand career channels. Certainly, we are excited about the STEM Summit that's coming up in May, and we always talk about seeing yourself in STEM, even if you don't have an immediate role model. If this is something you want to pursue, there are people available to help you and support you. And I really believe that is the core feature of the report that you are going to reveal today and talk about the recommendations. That yes, you need resources and you need to be able to invest in companies, but you also need that mentor, that coach, that champion to help you succeed. I am thrilled and honored to collaborate with all of you in making sure that these next steps are taken so that we have an even better, stronger, and fairer Commonwealth. Back to you, Amy.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor Polito, and for being an advocate for women across the state. So next, we're going to move on to a walkthrough with Deloitte on the actual report. And so Kevin McGovern, Deloitte's New England Managing Director, will provide us with an overview, the summary of the report and the action items that they've found. Kevin?
Well, thank you, Amy. Before I hand it off to the report's principal co-authors, Usama Salim and Connie Gamache, they'll do the summary of the report. On behalf of Deloitte, I just wanted to thank the Mayor's Office for Women's Advancement and the Massachusetts Competitive Partnership for the opportunity to collaborate on this important topic. Deloitte has long been focused on the challenges that women face in overcoming the multitude of obstacles that continue to put them at a systemic disadvantage. And we're proud to participate by offering some solutions for Massachusetts. And at this time, I'd like to hand it off to Connie and to Osama to summarize the report's findings.
Thank you, Kevin. Just give me a second to pull up a quick presentation that we were able to put together for this. So first and foremost, thank you everyone for joining us here today, and a very good morning. Much like Kevin said, I'd also like to take a moment to extend my gratitude to MACP and the City of Boston for inviting us to collaborate on the Women Entrepreneurship Initiative. We were able to develop this report together that is titled "It's Her Time, Women Entrepreneurship in Massachusetts," which of course sought to answer the question, what is the landscape of women entrepreneurship in Massachusetts? But before we do any of that, we should introduce ourselves. As Kevin mentioned, my name is Usama Salim. I am a consultant at Deloitte and had the privilege to serve as the engagement lead for this study.
Hello, everyone. My name is Connie Gamache, and I am an analyst at Deloitte and was the operations lead for this study. Usama and I also have the pleasure of serving on the Boston board of Deloitte's Step Up program. Step Up is an initiative within Deloitte that allows junior practitioners to donate their time and skills to the local communities by executing pro bono projects with nonprofits. The study that we'll be discussing today is a perfect example of that.
So today we'll discuss the state of women entrepreneurship globally and nationally, and then we'll talk about the research that we use and our methodology that we use to determine the local landscape, our findings, as well as our recommendations from the study that we conducted. Before we start talking about what we did, we wanted to discuss this Women Entrepreneurship Initiative, which was, its mission was to ensure women entrepreneurs across Massachusetts have optimal access to resources, financing, expertise, and networks necessary most relevant to starting, growing, and maintaining their businesses. One thing to note here is that we understand that this mission is broader than the 3 organizations that were involved in this. It requires a community of people and organizations like everyone joining us here today that are interested in the success of women entrepreneurship that can work together to make this mission a reality. So while we didn't get to achieve these exact mission through our project, our idea was to get one step closer. And that was by answering the question, where is Massachusetts in terms of achieving this optimal state? Before we start launching into solutions, let's make sure that we understand that local context and make recommendations based off of that. So that again, hopefully as a broader community, we can make this dream a reality.
To begin to answer the Massachusetts-specific research question that Usama just outlined, we wanted to have a holistic understanding of the current state of women entrepreneurship. What we found from a comprehensive literature review was that women are the fastest growing, highest performing, and most economically underutilized subsegment of entrepreneurs. This is a bold claim, but it was driven by bold numbers. Women represent 45% of all American businesses, and this number is growing. Women-owned businesses in the latter half of the past decade grew at more than twofold the rate of all other businesses. If you splice this data even further, women of color-owned businesses have grown fourfold. Not only is this representation growing, women are demonstrating their value in the market. Despite receiving less than half the funding, women founders returned 78 cents on the dollar compared to only the 31 cents of non-women founded companies. This growth in performance has resulted in 1.9 trillion in national revenue over the years 2014 and 2019. It's estimated that 90% of this income is then reinvested into the local economy. Thinking about this globally, global GDP could be increased by 5 trillion if women were provided the support that they need to truly thrive. These statistics make one thing clear: the future of entrepreneurship is women. However, when we did this literature review, we had found an abundance of research on the global and national stage. However, there was scant research on a state-specific level for Massachusetts. So we designed a study to unearth what women entrepreneurship looks like in Massachusetts. To do this, we leveraged a mixed methods approach to ensure we had a holistic understanding of the landscape. We did this by collecting secondary data through the aforementioned literature review, as well as compiled a list of all the resources in Massachusetts that were accessible to women. We also then wanted firsthand information from those on the ground and in the field. So we collected primary data through a survey of 102 women entrepreneurs and interviewed 13 of those respondents to get a deeper understanding of their personal experiences. We also then interviewed 10 subject matter experts and resource providers in the field to get their unique point of views. Once this was all complete, we analyzed and synthesized this information to culminate in a list of findings, recommendations, in our research report. I'll hand it off back to Usama to review the findings more in depth.
Thank you, Connie. So our discovery into the local context revealed that the landscape of resources dedicated to women entrepreneurship in Massachusetts was robust, but finding and accessing the right resources is somewhat difficult. They may be too difficult to navigate. There were issues with them being located too far away. They operate in a fragmented resource ecosystem. The eligibility criteria may be limiting, or sometimes the right resource that women entrepreneurs were looking for were not available. And when we talk about availability, we heard a lot about a lack of accounting and financing resources across different types of women entrepreneurs. We also heard that there was a need to strengthen networking and mentoring. The Case Foundation actually lays out a great framework for all of the above, in which they call the three capitals. They argue that capital is more than just financial capital, the traditional sense in which we think of capital. It also includes inspiration capital and social capital, where inspiration capital is the idea that just like we see the idealization of male entrepreneurs like Jeff Bezos, we also need to see women being represented in the field in the exact same way. And social capital being the idea that we need to expand women networks to make sure that they can hire the right people for the job, rather than just relying on immediate networks. We also asked the question, what are some broad stroke things that we need to keep in mind for the future? And usually it always came back to this idea of relevance. As an example, when we think about inspiration capital, feel-good stories don't always work. This idea that I was nothing and now became a millionaire isn't as helpful as how did you become a millionaire? What were your trials and tribulations in getting there? Similarly, there's a need to be local. It doesn't work for everyone if all of the resources or most of the resources are located in Boston. And last but not least, we need to consider intersectional identities. Women entrepreneurs are more than just women entrepreneurs. They define themselves using race, using parenthood, using socioeconomics. So these need to be incorporated into the resources that we deliver. Based on these 9 findings, we have 4 recommendations that I'll pass it back to Connie to walk through.
Thank you, Usama. The first recommendation that we make is that resources and entrepreneur support organizations should focus on improving resource accessibility, usability, marketing efforts, and relevancy. 46% of women entrepreneurs that we surveyed did not search for women-centered resources, many citing that they were unsure of where to look. The 54% that reported searching them often cited that the resources were difficult to find and when found had clunky usability and unclear eligibility criteria or were not relevant to their experiences. We urge ESOs to consider the voices of entrepreneurs when designing and optimizing their resources and websites. Secondly, given the clustering effect of 70% of the resources that we found being located in the Boston metropolitan area, new programming should have a regional and local focus, especially outside of the urban epicenter. Specifically, women entrepreneurs cited needing increased support in accounting, financing, and industry-specific programming. Thirdly, policy must have a seat at the table. Whether it be policies on parental leave, childcare, or relief funding, there is an untapped opportunity to support women entrepreneurs. One highly requested policy that we heard in our interviews and surveys, which underscores the importance of understanding the intersectional identities that Usama mentioned earlier, is universal childcare. Studies from other countries shown that universal childcare can increase the presence of women entrepreneurship by over 12%. Lastly, our interviews revealed that many ESOs have duplicative and overlapping missions in the resource ecosystem. By uniting these fragmented efforts through initiatives like data sharing, platform collaboration, and joint initiatives, these organizations can create a network or a one-stop shop for female entrepreneurs to have everything that they need in one place and ultimately become more effective in the goal of supporting women. We believe that if these recommendations are followed, Massachusetts will continue to become the top state for women entrepreneurs. We would like to thank you all for joining us today on this early Monday morning to dive into the report and our findings. I'll pass it back to you, Amy.
Thank you, Kevin, Usama, and Connie, and the whole Deloitte team for your efforts in conducting the research needed to help us identify the opportunities for improvement in supporting women entrepreneurs. Next up, we're going to have a panel discussion with 3 women entrepreneurs who have chosen to do business here in Massachusetts. To moderate our panel, we have our chairman, Jeff Leiden. Apologies for the delay. We had some tech snags here, so I just wanted to confirm we were moving forward with the panel as needed. But we have our chairman of MACP, Jeff Leiden, who is the executive chairman of Vertex Pharmaceuticals. He's been a member of MACP's board since 2013 and has recently become the chairman of the board in 2021. Prior to his chairmanship, Jeff has led MACP's efforts in innovation and technology, including our digital health initiative launched in 2016. Jeff served as president and CEO at Vertex from 2012 to 2020 and has been on its board of directors since 2009. Under his leadership, Vertex has delivered the first and only precision medicines to treat the underlying cause of cystic fibrosis. Additionally, Jeff cares deeply about inspiring and equipping under-resourced students and young women to become the next generation of scientific leaders. He established a signature program at Vertex to enhance STEAM education among students in our local communities, including an on-site learning lab, mentorship programs, internships, and college scholarships. We are so fortunate to have such an impressive leader spearheading MACP's initiatives. And I'll now pass the mic over to Jeff, who will be introducing today's panelists. Jeff?
Thanks so much, Amy, for that kind introduction. I also want to make sure to thank our guest speakers who opened today's program, Alexandra Valdez from the City of Boston, Lieutenant Governor Karen Polito, who has just been a longtime supporter of women in STEM and women entrepreneurship, Corey Thomas, co-chair of MACP's Social Justice Committee. Corey has really become a very clear advocate and voice at MACP for social justice. And then Kevin McGovern and the Deloitte team for all of their work to put the report together and the presentation this morning. It's a terrific first step that I think will allow us to put in place some specific initiatives to improve women's entrepreneurship in Massachusetts. So the statistics and surveys that you heard from Deloitte this morning, I think are a sobering reminder of how much work we still have to do on women's entrepreneurship in Massachusetts. But sometimes it's equally informative to hear from successful entrepreneurs about their personal experiences, both good and bad, in starting and growing companies in the innovation economy. So today I'm very honored to host a fireside chat with three incredibly accomplished and successful women entrepreneurs who I also count as close friends and colleagues. Dr. Sangeeta Bhatia is the Dorothy Wilson Professor of Bioengineering at MIT. Her research lab has made multiple breakthroughs in nanotechnology and tissue engineering, and she's one of the very few scientists in the world who's a member of the National Academy of Sciences, the National Academy of Engineering, and the National Academy of Medicine. Perhaps equally importantly for our discussion today, she started two very successful biotech companies, Glimpse and Satellite, as well as starting Keys to Empowering Youth, which is a program that brings middle school girls to visit high-tech labs and inspire them towards careers in STEM. Dr. Daphne Koller is a world-renowned computer scientist and specialist in artificial intelligence, as well as an educator who was professor of computer science and a MacArthur Fellow at Stanford for many years before becoming founding CEO of Coursera, which you know is the largest online education platform in the world. After her success at Coursera, Daphne moved on to found In Citro, a biotech company using artificial intelligence to accelerate the discovery and development of breakthrough drugs. She's an elected member of the National Academy of Engineering, and in 2012 was named one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people. And I think, Daphne, in 2010, you were named one of the 10 most influential people in the world by Newsweek as well. A.G. Breitenstein is a lawyer, public health expert, and serial entrepreneur who's founded and led multiple for-profit and non-for-profit companies, including Humedica, which was acquired by Optum in 2013. She stayed on at Optum first as chief product officer and then as director of Optum Ventures, which is the VC arm of the company where she led their investment efforts. So she served both on the entrepreneurial side and the investment side. More recently, she founded and is the CEO of Folks Health, which is the first digital healthcare company for the queer community. She also served as co-chair of Governor Charlie Baker's Digital Healthcare Data Working Group and the Massachusetts Work Group of the Privacy of Medical Records, and worked very closely with me on the Digital Healthcare Initiative, was a real leader in that effort. So thanks to all of you for participating in today's discussion. I thought I'd open it up with actually a question for each of you to answer in turn. The report, as you heard, calls out access to resources and also lack of mentorship as two of the most important impediments to encouraging more women entrepreneurs. Each of you is a successful serial entrepreneur, so I'd love to hear, what do you each see as the most important impediments that still stand in the way of more women starting their own companies? And maybe Sangeeta, I'll start with you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's lovely to be here, and thanks, Jeff, for that nice introduction. As Jeff said, my perspective comes from being the daughter of immigrants. I'm a product of the public schools in the Boston suburbs. I'm an educator at MIT, and I'm the mother of two teenagers. So I have a lot of young women in my life. I think that the two main things that the report outlined are absolutely the right areas to focus. So access to mentors. We can show you kind of a roadmap for how to start a company, but not just that, who to call, how to have access to the venture capitalists, who to put on your board. So access to mentoring is super important. And then access to that capital. So once you're in the room, converting that into really the capital that you need to building your business. Those are really, I think, the starting points to changing the game.
AG, tell us a little about your experiences, good and bad, and what you see as the impediments.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks so much for putting this together. What a great discussion. What a great group of folks. I think back on the earliest days when I was starting my first business, and I remember that I got lucky enough to get included in a boot camp program, which really put us through our paces with respect to everything from our business plan to the way to talk about it, to the landscape of entrepreneurs and the landscape of VCs. Put us through trials of presentation, really refined kind of, and gave us a good sense of the expectations. And I think programs like this, to me, are really the sort of key. I think one of the things that as an early entrepreneur is you are sort of getting bits and pieces of the landscape, but putting that landscape together into a complete picture to really understand how it works. If you don't have programs like that, you know, can take years of just incidental conversations. So I feel like these systemic programs that really give us, you know, the 30,000-foot helicopter tour of how to build a business, how to talk about a business, how to raise money, who the players are. And Massachusetts, I think, has such a fundamentally well-developed and great community of VCs and funders, as well as former entrepreneurs that can help with that. And I think that those are the programs that give us, you know, I think a unique opportunity to accelerate access to capital and to business building by anyone, and especially women.
Yeah, it's interesting, AG, that you say that, because, you know, I think it's equally true for male entrepreneurs. I've been working with a whole bunch of young entrepreneurs recently, male and female, and I find that just walking them through sort of the basics of how to put together and do a presentation. Where do you go for funding? What do you ask for? I mean, I often find that they ask for way too little funding actually for their activities. And so I do think more formalized programs can really help young entrepreneurs. So Daphne, you've been incredibly successful raising money, starting companies, but maybe what are the impediments that you see still out there?
So first of all, like Sangeeta, I have many young women in my life. I'm also the mother of 2 teenage girls, and I see that even today, with all of the progress that we think we've made, there is still a lot of impediments for young girls to see their path forward to careers in STEAM as well as to entrepreneurship. So if I had to highlight 2 specific things, beyond the mentorship, I'd like to specifically talk about the lack of a network. It's really important when building a company to have the people that you know who could connect you to the right kind of other people, and especially in the world that we live today where talent is such a scarce commodity. Knowing the people who can connect you to the folks who can join you on your journey is just a real impediment to young women, where often many of the existing networks are still a little bit of an old boys club. And the other one, I think, is just a matter of expectations that you have of yourself and expectations that others have of you, of certain kinds of behaviors, certain kinds of paths, where if you're a woman who exhibits the traits that are viewed as necessary to be a successful entrepreneur, a certain level of assertiveness, a certain level of putting yourself forward, it's considered to be not a seemly thing for a lot of young women. And so whether it's the expectations of society or your own expectations of yourself, I think that's a real barrier for women to put themselves in a position where they say, I'm going to start a company. It's like, really, you? So I think that's a real issue.
Thank you. Agreed completely. So we heard from the Lieutenant Governor about the notion of see yourself in STEM. And this comes back a little, Daphne, to what you and Sangeeta were saying. So, you know, let's talk about see yourself in STEM a little bit. And maybe, AG, I'll start with you, and how you see that applying to women entrepreneurs. You know, Folks Health, both the team members, the employees, I think really bring their own personhood into the job. And they provide patients with an environment where they can express their own personhood. How did you do that? How do we do that better for women in general, so that they, to Daphne's point, they see themselves as successful entrepreneurs who can go out and ask for what they actually need to get their company started and grow?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, and I was thinking about what Daphne just said. Some of it is about us really starting to recognize what we bring to the table that's special. And I think when women entrepreneurs start to realize that they're returning multiples on the dollar relative to, you know, the benchmark of the industry overall, when we start to appreciate the kinds of teams that we build, the environments that we build, and the science and the technology that we build, it's really about seeing ourselves first, and then standing in that recognition and appreciating it for ourselves, and then going out to the market to essentially sell it. And I feel like we're so often sort of trained to look outwards for that sense of validation and confirmation that we're delivering value. And I think if we can spend a little more time you know, talking to each other and really pointing out for each other how much value we're delivering in the marketplace. And then when you do finally get into that moment where you are presenting to, you know, a VC, or you're thinking about selling to the marketplace, you're sort of standing solidly on your own 2 feet, as opposed to feeling like the market is changing its value for you. And that to me is a fundamental shift in consciousness, and a fundamental recognition of what's always been true, but really calibrating that relative to, you know, I think misunderstood expectations among a lot of folks that, you know, they have to catch up. It's like, no, you don't have to catch up. You were always there at the head of the pack. I think that's a powerful thing for anybody, but certainly for this community.
Great, thank you. Daphne, so you've been really one of the leaders in innovative new methods of education, particularly online education and Coursera. Talk a little bit about how online education might help with some of this education and also culturalization of women, by the way, not only in the US, but around the world, how it could help encourage women entrepreneurship.
So I think there's 2 pieces to that. The first of all is just access to education, which for many women, and certainly around the world, is lacking even disproportionately to that of men. And there's still parts of the world where women are not expected or sometimes even allowed to leave the house to pursue an education. And what we've been able to do at Coursera is, in many cases, bring the education to them. And I'd like to just take a very brief moment to tell one of my favorite stories in this regard, of a young woman from Bangladesh who was really distraught at the fact that in her country, many women are sold into indentured servitude. So she ran off with her friend and they started a small business, a bakery, but they didn't know how to run a business because none of them had ever been taught. So somehow she found Coursera, and they took a lot of courses on the platform in business and entrepreneurship, courses from Wharton, for example, and Michigan and others. And she learned how to run a business that not only supported ultimately her and her friend, but a total of 7 women who she had been able to rescue from a life of servitude. So to me, the access to this kind of educational opportunity is just something that is so lacking for many women around the world. And we need to create paths to those women, as well as women in the United States, the single moms, the people who work 2 jobs to support their families. How do you give them the tools to get themselves to that next step? The other one, which I think is maybe less obvious, but we've also even demonstrated at Coursera was important with data, is giving women access to female role models. For a lot of us in academia, at least in STEAM departments, when I went to school, I think it's gotten a little bit better, but unfortunately not so much. There is 10% women faculty, 15% women faculty. You can go through an entire degree program taking 0 classes or 1 class from a female role model. And that doesn't encourage women to think of themselves as graduates or entrepreneurs in this area. What we were able to show with data, and it's a fascinating experiment, is that when you have even a small number of truly amazing, accomplished women professors who are now offering their classes to tens of thousands of people around the world, you actually create a female role model. And that does in fact encourage women to take those courses and stick with them. And the funnest experiment that we did on that was a course that was actually provided by a husband and wife pair at the University of Washington. The husband actually happens to be my former PhD student, they're both wonderful scientists. And we actually did an A/B experiment on the platform where some students were presented with the husband's name first and the wife second, and the other was the other way around. And of the group that got the wife's name first, more women enrolled and succeeded in the course because they sort of had that female role model in front of them. So those are experiments that are very hard to do in any other format than an online platform, but it does show that role modeling in a controlled experiment actually does help.
I mean, one of the things I just love about the online education experience is I call it's the democratization of education, right? It just really allows access for all sorts of really bright people who otherwise just don't have any access. And think about expanding the pool of entrepreneurs tenfold or 100-fold as you go around the world. It's just such an incredibly powerful tool. You know, AG, it's sort of like democratization of healthcare through online telemedicine and other ways of delivering it into the home. So I think it's going to be a very, very powerful force going forward. So Sangeeta, I know you've been working on this pipeline problem, particularly at MIT with some of your colleagues, and particularly looking at girls, you know, and how do you get girls excited about STEM and stay excited? Because they actually start off excited, and unfortunately we extinguish a lot of the excitement as they go through. Talk a little bit about some of the ideas that have come out of the pipeline programs you've been working on at MIT.
Sure, yeah. So, you know, I think you're right. So up until age 11, the data show that boys and girls express equal interest. And then the sort of so-called leaky pipeline begins, and that's when girls start to drop out. So what we've tried to do is target exactly that age group with programs, bring them to campus. The one that you talked about in the introduction is one where we bring young girls to campus and they meet women in the Society of Women Engineers to take them around to labs, to do hands-on activities. You know, and so in that day, they visit the campus, they meet 30 young women who are in engineering majors that they never knew existed, chemical, mechanical, electrical. They get to talk to them about that. They meet each other, they see each other being excited, they form sort of a cohort of themselves. And, you know, those sorts of things really actually increase retention in the profession to find young women that have your interest. I experienced that personally. My best friend in college was an engineer. We're still best friends. So that I think is one thing that's really important. And social media actually in this moment is a huge opportunity and magnifier for the good in some cases. I was talking to my teenagers last night and they told me there's a TikTok channel on women in STEM. So, you know, I think there really is a chance to magnify the role model effect that Daphne was talking about. And then to AG's point, I think that we cannot forget the importance actually of parents in this conversation. And their aspirations for their children. You know, I became an entrepreneur in part because when I became a professor, my dad said to me, oh, okay, but when will you start your first company? Not when will you start a company, when will you start your first company? And, you know, and so now he's happy because I've done that. But, you know, I think having parents believe that for their young girls is just as important as what they see for themselves.
Yeah, this notion of hands-on is something we've really discovered, you know, through our learning lab as well, both for girls and boys. But the lecture part of it, the textbook part of it, it's awfully hard to get that excited when you're a 7th or 8th grader. But gosh, you let them sequence DNA or make hydrogen-powered cars with their own hands, and it's just transformative. You know, we ran this summer camp for girls in STEM the last couple of years, really just focused on girls and particularly girls of color. And it's remarkable to see them blossom as they do these hands-on experiments and realize, yeah, they can program computers, they can build cars, they can make music, and their level of confidence and excitement just rises over a 3-4 week period of time. Let's talk a little about mentorship. So mentorship was one of the big themes of the report. It's a big theme that you all started to talk about a little bit. Talk a little bit about how should we improve mentorship for female entrepreneurs, and also a little controversial subject, what role should men play in that mentorship program, if any? Sangeeta, you want to start off?
Sure, I'm happy to start. Yeah, I think, actually, I think there's a huge role for male mentors to play. I will say up until this point in my entrepreneurship career, all of my mentors have been men, every single one of them. And those were people that I sought out, Jeff, you included, whenever I had a new idea. And so it's not just giving advice, it's being active sponsors of women that you believe in. It's putting them in your boardroom, getting them connected, co-founding companies with them. You know, all of those things, really making them part of the ecosystem. I think that's a really important role that men have to play.
Okay. Daphne, what about mentorship and men in mentorship and women in mentorship?
I agree 100% with Sangeeta. Mentors, especially great mentors, are so hard to come by. If you restrict the pool of mentors to only female mentors, you've reduced considerably the availability of mentorship resources to young women. I think it's actually incumbent upon men to really try and create that ecosystem and to do everything that Sangeeta said, to connect their women mentees with other successful people, to put them on boardrooms, to help them in their career. And I think if we don't actually create that expectation of men, that it is part of their responsibility to create a healthier ecosystem for all of us by helping advance young women, I think that that would be a huge detriment. I think it's also important for us to have some women mentors and women role models. But the truth is, and I'm sure my fellow panelists can attest to that, there's so few of us that we get pulled in 100 different directions. We get asked to do so many things because what do you mean you can't have a panel without a woman? You can't have a committee without a woman. And as the woman in whatever your ecosystem, you get invited to do way too many things, some of which are very important, so I'm not diminishing from that. So I think it's important for others to chip in as well. And I would just add, maybe just on top of that, that in many ways, it's actually easier for a man to advance the interests of a woman because it's less, I know this is controversial, but it comes across as less, oh, here's a woman just promoting another woman. And I think if you also have men that are jumping in and saying, this is a truly amazing leader here, I think it gets an extra little boost from that as well. So I think it's really important.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. So AG, talk a little about both sides of it. I'm sure you also get asked to mentor lots of women entrepreneurs. Talk a little about that, and also who mentored you.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And yeah, I think restating the obvious, it is absolutely essential. Like Sangeeta, I think almost all of my mentors were male leaders, co-founders, folks in the venture community. And I think that's essential. I think formalizing that and thinking about, particularly the state's investment in investment, one of the things that we should be investing in are those mentor networks, because they are essentially the snow plow that plows the snow for everybody behind them. And I think really thinking about how we can create networks of mentors and use those systematically to lever up the whole state, I think is a really powerful thing. And I think, Jeff, you and I have talked about that on multiple occasions and how to utilize those networks. But I do think, to Daphne's point, at the end of the day, we all want to be successful entrepreneurs, not successful female entrepreneurs, not successful queer entrepreneurs. We want to be successful entrepreneurs, period, and regarded as such. So I think, holding us all to account on what it means to be successful and recognizing the special strengths we bring to that is key, as opposed to, creating any sort of tiered or differential system of expectations that actually, I think, ultimately redounds negatively to our effect, but really realizing our ability to compete, against anybody in any circumstance, to me, is the key.
It's interesting you talk about the network, and the network can take several forms, right? At MACP, we've been hosting these mentorship dinners where a senior, one of the CEOs has 8 or 10 women to a dinner to talk about entrepreneurship and to mentor them. And what we're finding is there's as much mentorship between the women who are at the dinner as there is from the senior CEO to the others, right? So that there is this cross-fertilization that also takes place that I think we shouldn't ignore as we talk about mentorship. Okay, so financing, let's get to the money here. So I'm sure you all are very aware of the statistic that in 2020, only 2.3% of all VC funding went to women, which is just an astounding statistic, and it's really true. It's true all over the world, by the way. And Sangeeta, I'll start with you because I read an interview about you, you were advised to bring a man when pitching for funding. Do you want to talk about that a little bit and your reaction to that and what you do now? Because I've heard you fundraise. I didn't see it. You bring a man to the fundraising recently.
Yeah, it's interesting since I gave that interview and told that story. So the story was a very senior college mentor of mine was giving me advice, and he told me I should bring my male graduate student to the meeting because people would feel more comfortable, and raising money is about making the VCs feel comfortable in part. And since I've told that story, I have heard from women all over the country that they have also been given that advice. So, and you know, all the institutions that you know. So it's fascinating. I mean, I think it is real advice out there. And what I do is I bring the graduate student if the graduate student belongs there, and I don't if the graduate student doesn't. So I essentially ignored the gender piece of that advice. But I will say that the data shows that when you are a woman pitching, you will get underestimated. You will get asked more about risk than vision, right? And so what I tell my female colleagues that are coming up is just know that and get ready. So when you get asked about risk, you pivot to vision. And when you get asked how much you're raising and at what value, you know the data, right? So that you cannot be, again, underestimated. So that's my approach for dealing with it. I think I'd love to hear from the fellow panelists what their strategies are.
So AG, you've been on both sides of the table, asking for money and giving away money. Talk about that a little bit and how you have seen people react to women entrepreneurs who are fundraising.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think, you know, unconscious bias acts in so many ways in every scenario, right? When you think about whether it's race or class or, you know, a whole bunch of other, you know, factors. So I think to Sangeeta's point, understanding sort of the phenomena in the background and just how human beings make decisions. And really understanding, you know, how when you pitch, you approach those unconscious biases. I think also it's about us choosing, you know, to be working affirmatively with VCs that have made strides towards acknowledging and uncovering and dealing with it. So I think there are some funds that have been extremely proactive in really trying to address DE&I and being serious about it. And then there are some who have not. And I think we as entrepreneurs actually need to start voting with our feet to sort of say, these are the funds that we want to work with. And also to drive the community of VCs to be spurring each other on in that regard. So I think, you know, it's as much us, you know, acknowledging what it means to sell our companies when it comes time to raising money, but also us as an entrepreneurial community saying, you know what, we got to do better. And we expect each other to take this issue on seriously, not just because it's an issue, I think, but because it also means that we're going to make more money. And that to me lines everybody up to sort of say, this is actually a great investment strategy. And if you don't realize that, then you're missing the boat. So I think it's got to fire on multiple levels so that we really do, I think, drive the whole industry forward, as opposed to putting it on us as female entrepreneurs, on, you know, entrepreneurs of color, so on, to deal with the bias and get the better of it. Because at the end of the day, the bias is actually getting the better of us as investors.
So Daphne, I think you've raised some of the largest fundraisings, man or woman, out there in the last 2 or 3 years, certainly for Incitro. So what's the secret sauce?
Well, I'm going to actually, before I answer that question, I just want to address one of the comments that Sangeeta made, because I just want to highlight the two-edged sword of the idea of coming in with a male colleague into a fundraising meeting, or for that matter, many other meetings where I'm sure I can see Sangeeta already nodding. When you come into a meeting with a male colleague, there is the default assumption that somehow he is the lead and you are the follower, like the second person in the company. And that happened in my academic days when I used to go to meetings with a male academic colleague, and it happened in fundraising circumstances as well. So I think one of the important things is to, when you go into these meetings, if you are founding the company with a male colleague, is to make sure that it is recognized the role that you play and the value that you bring into this, and not just have the assumption default to you're the second person and your male colleague is actually the lead. I would also say that it's really important to come in with the data. Sangeeta made that point of what are companies like yours, what are your ideas worth, and the value that you bring to the table, and really have the confidence to sort of be assertive and be willing to walk away if you feel like you're being undervalued. And I don't want to mention specific incidents, but there have been investors who you could ask whether it was an unconscious or a conscious bias, but there was definitely a sense that the value that I brought into the company was not being fully appreciated by the investors. So I think having some clarity on who the investors out there that are willing to take an entrepreneur and just view them as what they bring to the table without having gender be part of it. And I've been very fortunate in that at Incitro, is to really understand the investor ecosystem and who are the ones that you want to talk to and who are the ones that you don't. And that has multiple repercussions. It doesn't end with a check that goes into your bank account. I think that is something that's really important to point out to any entrepreneur, and certainly to a woman entrepreneur, that is a beginning of a relationship that lasts for years, and figuring out who's the person who's going to be supportive of you, not just in writing that initial check, but in being your ally in the next fundraise, in the boardroom if they join your board, and so on. The unconscious bias is much more important in those downstream events than it is in that initial check.
Yeah, I always tell young entrepreneurs, it's like getting married, right? So be very careful who you marry. It doesn't just need to be the best looking or the richest suitor. Make sure they're with you for the long term and they share your values, because otherwise the check comes and goes pretty quickly, but the relationship doesn't. I think that's a really important point. So, as MACP, our role is to try to make Massachusetts as competitive as we can be. We're often in competition with our colleagues in California, like Daphne. But I'd love to hear from all of you, how you see, because you've both been involved in East Coast and West Coast companies and with entrepreneurs. How do you see the differences between the East Coast, Boston, and the West Coast? Let's just call it San Francisco, San Diego, Seattle. And how does that affect your decisions on where to start a company, and what would you like to, what are the best features of each world, and maybe the not so great features of each world that we could improve? Now, Sangeeta, you want to start there? You have colleagues on the West Coast, the East Coast. You've thought about this a lot.
Yeah, so I will say I was at a West Coast university before I came back to MIT on the faculty, and I actually saved my startup idea to bring it back to Boston, because I think Boston is actually a really special ecosystem. I think the density of talent and VCs and fellow entrepreneurs and the pipeline of students and ideas, it's in my view is really unmatched. And so I really favor Boston as a place to start my companies. I will say that we could be doing much more. And so, Jeff, I recently did a study with colleagues at MIT, and we did the math on 7 departments, just 7 departments at MIT, and asked if the women faculty were starting at the same rate as men, what would it have meant for Boston? And the answer was 40 more companies just out of MIT. And then we started something called the Future Founder Boot Camp, which was 8 fireside chats over the pandemic, and 500 women in Boston and Cambridge signed up that were curious about starting companies. So we have an incredible potential to do much more than we're doing, as great as it is.
It's interesting, this boot camp idea. Let's talk about that for just one second. When we did digital healthcare, we went around to MIT, Harvard, and Northeastern, and we did sort of just digital 1-hour conference on what's it like to start a company. And I was absolutely astounded. I mean, we would be in auditoriums that were set up for like 100 people. There'd be 400 people waiting in the halls outside. We'd be televideoing it outside. I mean, there's this huge pent-up demand, men and women, young postdocs all the way to senior faculty, just who want to know, how do you do it, right? And I think, these are bright people with great ideas. We just need to open the highway and talk to them a little bit more about how you do it. And one observation, I'll maybe come to Daphne in a second. I think there's more knowledge about how you do it on the West Coast. When I go visit my friends at Stanford, I walk through the immunology department, every single person, every faculty member has started at least one company. It's absolutely astounding. And I think there's this notion of it's okay to do that and move back and forth from industry to academia. It's flexible, right? You can have these part-time positions, but I don't know, Daphne, am I just having San Francisco envy, or is there actually truly some difference there?
No, I think that especially at Stanford, which is such a hub of entrepreneurship, it's just in the air, and a lot of the students, even the undergrads who go through the program, are like, yeah, I'm going to start my own company at the end of my degree. Certainly a lot of my colleagues did. I will say that I wish someone had done the same study, though, at Stanford that Sangeeta and her colleagues did at MIT, which is, even anecdotally, I think that that is disproportionately true of male students and male colleagues. And I'm curious to know how much the gap is, even at an entrepreneurial ecosystem like Stanford. So I think the Bay Area certainly does have a lot to offer from starting a company perspective. I mean, Sand Hill Row is literally a bike ride from the Stanford campus, and there is a lot of interest in the VC ecosystem and funding companies that emerge from academia. So I think that's a terrific asset. The other thing I think the Bay Area has more even than the Boston ecosystem is that blend of the tech and biotech, where I think the Boston area has traditionally been very, very strong on the biotech, more traditional biotech, but that sort of more tech ecosystem is more dominant on the West Coast. So for companies like mine that really try and blend the two, it is a unique place to try and create that type of company. So I think there's certainly a lot that the Massachusetts ecosystem can do in order both to create more of that tech presence and also to educate the younger students, the younger faculty within that ecosystem as how one goes about this. What are the first few steps that you take? And also give them just even the conviction that they can. And I think that's the thing that, coming back to some of the earlier comments that I made, is particularly challenging for young women, is just recognizing that this is something that you can actually do.
So it's a great lead, and AG, the question I wanted to ask you, you and I have been working hard on this tech part of the ecosystem and strengthening it in Massachusetts, because I do agree with Daphne that historically it's just been so strong on the West Coast, and we've missed the boat a little bit there. Do you want to talk about that? I mean, you've been heavily involved in the tech side as well as the healthcare side, and how you see Massachusetts progressing and what we might be able to do there to strengthen that.
Yeah, so I want to pick up one thread though before we talk about that, which is I think one of the things that we have to underline as we talk with particularly young people and encouraging entrepreneurship at the university and even potentially at the high school level is the allowance for failure. We have to talk about the fact that you have to fail in order to succeed, and particularly as we think about young people and people coming from marginalized communities, permission to fail is not granted, right? We are always the first of blah, 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 or the few of blah, blah, blah. And as a result, we carry so many other people's aspirations with us. Whereas I think for dominant communities, there's not that expectation. So I think key to talking about encouraging women, folks of color, queer folks, whatever it is, we have to talk about the necessity and likelihood of failure as you are starting businesses, and really normalize that as part of the growth process. So that I think is a really important piece for us to continue to emphasize. And then Jeff, I think the work that we've been doing is thinking about, and both Sangeeta and Daphne touched on this very special ecosystem that is Massachusetts, given the STEM resources, given the data resources that live here, given I think it's acknowledged. Notionally, its acknowledged title as the World Healthcare Capital of America and potentially the world. There is a very special set of capabilities that we have to be able to share with each other and do something, I think, very, very unique. But again, I think it only comes if the people who are here or who would come here understand this to be an environment where you can accelerate that growth of your company or your idea in a really sort of unique way. And clearly the West Coast has captured that. But I think there is so much here that if we are able to tell the stories and share the experiences that folks that have been successful, what they've been able, Sangeeta, why did you wait to start it here? Those are the important stories and questions that I think will start to set precedent for the rest of us as we consider where to start companies.
Yeah, I really want to emphasize two things you said there, AG. One is about failure. I do believe, again, maybe I'm biased, that failure is more accepted on the West Coast than in Boston. I think even by the VC community, they're more conservative and less willing to back somebody who has failed once. Whereas on the West Coast, it's sort of a badge of pride, right? I failed once, now I'm really ready to, to succeed. And it really, it's almost an attitude, which is incredible. And then the other one is this sort of notion of, I think the West Coast is more accepting of the heterogeneity of entrepreneurs. I think in Boston there's still some of this model of what the entrepreneur looks like, and just too often that's the white male nerdy MIT grad. And if you're not that, then automatically, do we really want to support that person? Because those are the people who've succeeded for us in Massachusetts as as VCs. I think there's still that attitude that we need to break down. I've been talking to a lot of West Coast entrepreneurs recently. I'm working with lots of young entrepreneurs, and I'm very impressed with their diversity. Honestly, I'm seeing lots of young people of color. I'm seeing lots of women, more so than I see typically in Massachusetts when I go to that well. So it's just something I think we need to push on, because it opens up the opportunities. As Sangeeta said, we're missing 50-60% of the world if we don't include those folks.
Well, Jeff, and to your point, I think on that is understanding that the diversity of perspective actually is the stuff of innovation, right?
Totally.
We get innovation from someone's discovery of a different way of thinking about things, and I think really leaning into that is crucial.
Totally agree. All right, I have one final question for all of you. There are a lot of future entrepreneurs on this call and in the audience today. We've talked about a lot of different features of how to improve entrepreneurship. I'm just interested in hearing from each of you a hard question. If you had to give a future entrepreneur, female entrepreneur, woman entrepreneur, one piece of advice that you think will both encourage and make them more successful, what would that one piece of advice be? So I'll give you a minute to think about it, and then Sangeeta, I'll start with you. But really one piece of advice to sort of encourage and help them be more successful.
Yeah, my piece of advice builds on AG's last comment, which is that I think building diverse organizations is actually translates to the bottom line, to innovation and successful businesses. And so as these young women become entrepreneurs, what I would say is be a multiplier, build your organization as a diverse organization, from the top down. I do that in my own companies, and I think they're stronger for it. The board, the C-level, at every single rank and file, and that will also have the benefit of diversifying our ecosystem.
Great. AG, one piece of advice?
Yeah, I would say figure out a way to go fail fast. One of the things, and I know that's a really hackneyed comment, but one of the things that I always said to folks that we were looking to invest in is, look, the best entrepreneurs are right 40% of the time at any given moment in time. And it's the best entrepreneurs that are chasing the horizon of the remaining 60%. And if you are slow, that number slowly dwindles from 40 to 39 to 38 and so on. So it is about learning how to learn really, really fast. And so the question is, in what environments can you figure out how to learn really, really fast? And what are the resources you need to put around you to be continually reminding you of the things that you don't know? What are the unknown unknowns? And recognize that 40% being less than half means the likelihood of mistake is really high. And if you can kind of get that calculus in your head, it releases this sense of like, oh my God, I'm screwing up every single day, which I think is the perennial kind of backdrop of voiceover in every entrepreneur's head, which is like, holy crap, what am I doing? I took all this money and I'm screwing this up. Understand that is the most, the greatest likelihood on any given day. And it is just pushing through that really distinguishes you as an entrepreneur.
It's the pushing through that I would tell entrepreneurs about, right? Which is, in my experience, successful entrepreneurs, it's not a matter of failing or succeeding. It's a matter of you will have failures on your way to success, many of them. It's a roller coaster ride. It's a near-death experience, and you have to be willing and able to be flexible enough to push through that and learn. And every one of us on this call has done that in their successful companies. And I would venture to say, none of you would say it's all been a success ride. It's been a bunch of failures followed by successes followed by failures. That's the nature of the beast. So I think that's a really important point. Daphne, I'm going to give you the final word. One piece of advice for women entrepreneurs.
So I'm going to start off where AG left off, because I love those comments. I also agree with everything Sangeeta said about diverse organizations, which is have the courage to just go out there and put yourself out there and break out of the mold of what people expect or what you think people expect of you. And if you feel that something is really important and you have an idea that is unique and can be successful, have the courage to give it a go and try and make it work, recognizing that failure is in fact an option. And maybe just to sort of, this is 1.5 pieces of advice. I hope I have license to do that, Jeff. Don't be afraid to ask people for help, because oftentimes people are worried that when things are not going well and they're struggling and they go and ask for help, they will look like they're failing. So as you're going on your journey and you encounter those hard moments, have a group of trusted people that you can go and say, you know what? I need help with this piece. Can you help me figure this out? So I think the courage to do something where you're really uncomfortable, where you're putting yourself out there, and having the courage to ask for help.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much for participating. I literally cannot imagine 3 more inspirational entrepreneurs for future women entrepreneurs than all of you. I'm sort of betting your email accounts are going to blow up here. But thank you for being here. But most importantly, thank you for being role models and successful entrepreneurs for others in the future. Really appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you. Yes. Hi, Jeff. Thank you so much for your leadership, and Sangeeta, Daphne, and AG for sharing your experience in being pioneers for other women. Having leaders like you allows aspiring entrepreneurs to create new frameworks to create and develop the courage and resilience it takes to both fail and succeed. To close out our event today, we'd like to finish with a video message from Ron O'Hanley, Chairman and CEO of State Street and MACP's Social Justice Committee co-chair.
Hello, and thank you for attending today's event celebrating the release of It's Her Time, Women Entrepreneurship in Massachusetts. A special thank you to the Lieutenant Governor for your inspiring remarks. I would also like to thank Sangeeta, Daphne, and AG for providing insight into your experiences, and to Jeff for leading a thoughtful discussion. I am looking forward to partnering with Corey as the co-chairs of MACP's Social Justice Committee, where we will continue to work towards building a more just and equitable Massachusetts. As we celebrate Women's History Month, I am keenly aware that for all that has been accomplished, our potential exceeds our progress when it comes to the advancement of women in Massachusetts and beyond. When women succeed, we all do. Directing targeted support to women entrepreneurs not only helps the individual founders, but also contributes to making Massachusetts competitive. As our report recommends, coordinated collaboration is essential to our goal of uplifting entrepreneurs and small business owners, which is why I'm such an ardent partner of this organization. As we bring today's event to a close, I am pleased to share an example of the type of collaboration proposed in the report with Small Business Strong, a collaborative effort with State Street and many other of the MACP partners here today. Take a look.
Hello, my name is Yvonne Garcia, and I am Chief of Staff to State Street Chairman and CEO Ron O'Hanley and Global Head of State Street's Internal Communications. As we have all seen, the COVID-19 pandemic is the greatest public health crisis the world has faced in over a century. It has created a rapid economic disruption and has had a disproportionately negative impact on the smallest businesses in Massachusetts and those owned by underserved groups, including people of color and women. More than 650,000 small business owners drive our state's economies and local communities, employing 1.5 million in technology startups, retail shops, consulting business, and more. Needless to say, they are the lifeblood of our state. Starting a business is a true act of will. Even in normal times, managing a business is a constant test of vision, skill, and resolve. However, what our small businesses are facing today is nothing close to normal. That is why we partnered with various organizations across the Commonwealth to create Small Business Strong. Through Small Business Strong, we have been able to provide high-quality services to Massachusetts small businesses in order to help them bridge through the current economic crisis with a particular focus on those that are minority and women-owned. More specifically, at no cost to the business owner, we provide a public website with a range of self-service business resources and access to a group of professional volunteers able to provide small businesses with guidance and advice on how to best address challenges they may be facing and further consultation in the areas of finance, accounting, operations, marketing, digital, human resources, and law, to name a few. Since launching in May 2020, I'm pleased to share that Small Business Strong has received applications from over 1,200 businesses from across the Commonwealth. Nearly 90% of these businesses for which we have data are owned by people of color or women. While nearly 1/3 of the businesses we've supported are located in Boston, most of them are spread across the state, including in Metro West, the Northeast, the Southeast, and in Central and Western Massachusetts. The majority of our businesses have come to us for financial help, including applying for PPP loans and state grant programs, as well as deploying digital marketing and e-commerce platforms. It's truly remarkable what can be accomplished when corporate, nonprofits, and community partners come together towards a common goal. In this instance, supporting our collective communities and small businesses. Together, we know that Massachusetts will continue to be small business strong. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron, Yvonne, and the entire State Street team for your commitment to small businesses and entrepreneurs, especially during these difficult times. This brings us to the conclusion of our event this morning. I want to thank all of our participants that have contributed so much to today's event, but also to the incredible ecosystem here in Massachusetts that makes this state such a special place to live and work. Thank you to our attendees. You all will be receiving a link to the full report shortly if you haven't already. And we hope you enjoyed today's conversation and look forward to continuing to identify ways that we can support women entrepreneurs and make Massachusetts the best place in the world to start and run a business. Thank you all.